26. 10. Lisbon Regicide. Lisbon Regicide was the murder of King Carlos I of Portugal and his heir apparent, Luís Felipe, Prince Royal of Portugal, by assassins sympathetic to Republican interests and aided by elements within the Portuguese Carbonaria, disenchanted politicians and anti-monarchists. The events occurred on the 1st of February 1908 at the Praça do Comércio along the banks of the Tagus River in Lisbon, commonly referred to by its antiquated name Terreiro do Paco. 9. Abraham Lincoln. No assassination has had as great an impact on a country than did that of the 16th President of the United States. His death at the hands of actor-turned-Southern agitator John Wilkes Booth is not only the stuff of legend, but was disastrous to the South as well, who would have fared much better under Lincoln's conciliatory hand in the aftermath of the Civil War than it did under Andrew Johnson and subsequent administrations. In fact, it could be said that because of Booth's treachery, the Civil War lasted decades longer, at least in the minds of many Southerners, than it would have otherwise, and likely contributed greatly to the oppression of blacks in the South. As such, in killing Lincoln, Booth may have damaged his beloved South far more than his actions could ever have helped it. 8. Alexander II. While not many people likely know much about Tsar Alexander II of Russia, his death at the hands of terrorists, yes, they had them even back then, though at the time they were known as anarchists, in March of 1881 changed the course of Russia for the bad. Something of an enlightened monarch and a reformer, he was on the verge of creating a parliament in Russia at the time of his death, which likely would have led to the country's eventual democratization, much as was seen in England and other European countries around this time. Instead, his successors decided to take a more heavy-handed approach, resulting in 30 more years of oppressive and corrupt leadership and sowing the seeds for the 1917 revolution that would introduce communism to the world, the effects of which we are still feeling today. 7. Julius Caesar. While the sort of event that seems more a part of melodrama than real history, the murder of Rome's greatest general and first emperor at the hands of his own senators set the Roman Empire on a course that was to set her on the path of centuries of turmoil and treachery. What Rome might have looked like had he stayed in power is unknown, of course, but it's likely the transition of power in the future would have been a far less messy affair, and there certainly wouldn't have been the resultant civil war that very nearly split the empire in two either. On the other hand, without Caesar's death to kickstart a whole sordid chain of events, we would never have the Cleopatra, Mark Antony tryst to entertain us all these centuries would be. 6. John F. Kennedy. While Kennedy was just one of 4 U.S. presidents to die at the hands of an assassin, and one of no fewer than 10 presidents to experience an assassination attempt, none were as public or had as much impact on the American psyche as did the death of the young former senator from Massachusetts. While his death had only a minor impact on the political course he had set for the country, his successor, Lyndon Johnson, continued with many of his programs and policies. It can never be denied how profoundly his death cast a pall over the American people that has, in some ways, remained to this day. But even more than that, his death resulted in the creation of the entire cottage industry of conspiracy theories, all of which have done much to stoke the fires of paranoia and cynicism that burn so strongly in this country. 5. Reinhard Heydrich. Only World War II history buffs would likely know who Reinhard Heydrich was, but he was the one man who could have won the war for Germany had he not been killed by Czech partisans on the streets of Prague in 1942. How? Every bit as ruthless and twice as smart as his protege, Adolf Hitler, the man was being groomed to be the Führer's successor when he died. Had he lived, who knows if he might not have eventually found the kahunas to oust an increasingly frail and delusional Hitler and take the reins of the Third Reich himself, a prospect that could have had profound implications for the Allies. Certainly, under Heydrich's leadership, the many mistakes made by Hitler in the last years of the war that all but sealed Germany's fate may have been avoided. On the other hand, he may have just made different mistakes that would have hastened Germany's defeat, but that's for the alternative history aficionados to work out. 4. William McKinley. On September 6, 1901, William McKinley, the 25th President of the United States, was shot on the grounds of the Pan American Exposition at the Temple of Music in Buffalo, New York. He was shaking hands with the public when Leon Czolgosz, an anarchist, shot him twice in the abdomen. McKinley died 8 days later on September 14 of gangrene caused by the gunshot wounds. He was the third American president to have been assassinated, following Abraham Lincoln in 1865 and James A. Garfield in 1881. 3. Umberto I of Italy. Occurring a year before the assassination of President McKinley in the U.S., the attentat against King Umberto I of Italy by silk weaver Gaetano Bresci took place in the midst of arguably the most violent period of anarchist history, when the tactic of propaganda by the deed was being employed to the full by individual anarchists. An immigrant to the U.S. in the late 1890s, Bresci had helped found an Italian anarchist newspaper in the manufacturing town of Paterson, New Jersey. However, in the spring of 1900, Bresci shocked his comrades at the newspaper by asking the return of a loan he had used to help pay the printing costs. Refusing to explain his behavior, he left the U.S. in May 1900 to seek out King Umberto and commit his attentat. To Alexander I of Yugoslavia. After the Eustaces Velebit uprising in November 1932, Alexander said through an intermediary to the Italian government, "If you want to have serious riots in Yugoslavia or cause a regime change, you need to kill me. Shoot at me and be sure you have finished me off, because that's the only way to make changes in Yugoslavia." As a result of the previous deaths of 3 family members on a Tuesday, Alexander refused to undertake any public functions on that day of the week. On Tuesday the 9th of October 1934, however, he had no choice, as he was arriving in Marseille to start a state visit to France to strengthen the two countries' alliance in the Little Entente. While Alexander was being slowly driven in a car through the streets along with French Foreign Minister Louis Barthou, a gunman, the Bulgarian Vlado Chernozemski, stepped from the street and shot the king twice, and the chauffeur, with a Mauser C96 semi-automatic pistol. Alexander died in the car, slumped backwards in the seat, with his eyes open. One of the bullets struck Foreign Minister Barthou in the arm, passing through and fatally severing an artery. He died of excessive blood loss less than an hour later. 1. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, heir presumptive to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, occurred on the 28th of June 1914 in Sarajevo when they were mortally wounded by Gavrilo Princip. Princip was one of a group of 6 assassins, 5 Serbs and 1 Bosniak, coordinated by Danilo Ilic, a Bosnian Serb and a member of the Black Hand Secret Society. The political objective of the assassination was to break off Austria-Hungary's South Slav provinces so they could be combined into a Yugoslavia. The assassins' motives were consistent with the movement that later became known as Young Bosnia. The assassination led directly to the First World War when Austria-Hungary subsequently issued an ultimatum to the Kingdom of Serbia, which was partially rejected. Austria-Hungary then declared war, triggering actions leading to war between most European states.